Welcome to Meet Up with Austin. I'm Austin Furhman with an American legendary comedian, Bob Newhart, known for his satire and deadpan genres. Mr. Newhart was prominent in the late 1960s with the button-down Bob Newhart, and during the late 1970s, the Bob Newhart Show. So before we get into Elf and the button-down mind of Bob Newhart and The Big Bang Theory, I'd like to talk a little bit about your childhood and how you got to have an interest in becoming a comedian in the first place.
Okay.
So can you tell us a little bit about your childhood?
Well, it was a fairly normal childhood, I guess. It was, I was born and raised in Chicago. My dad went through the Depression, but as a kid, he lost his job. He couldn't get a job for years and years. But as a kid, you just take that as a given. You know, you think every kid's going through the same thing you're going through. And I went to Catholic schools. I went to St. Catherine's Grammar School, and then St. Ignatius High School, and then Loyola University in Chicago. And I graduated with a degree from Loyola in accounting. And so when I graduated, I went into service during the Korean War for 2 years. And I got out, and I was an accountant for about 2.5 years. I was with the Glidden Company, and it was a Glidden, and well, anyway, I was an accountant for Gypsum, U.S. Gypsum. I was trying to think of the name. And then I left that. A friend of mine worked for a production house, and he hired me as a copywriter. And I did that for about 6 months. And I got fired from that job because they were cutting back, and so they eliminated half the staff. And at that time, I just decided I was young, I was living at home, I wasn't married, I had no obligations, so I was just going to give comedy a try. Years and years and years, people would, friends of mine would say, "You're very funny. You ought to go to New York and or television," and of course that's easy for people to say, but then when you have to do it, so I just decided to set 2 years aside and see if I could make a living in comedy. Comedy, and but then 2 years became 3 years, and 3 years became 4 years. And then I had a friend of mine, a disc jockey in Chicago, named Dan Sorkin, and he was a very prominent disc jockey, and he was familiar with some of the stuff I had done. I was on his TV show, local TV show in Chicago, and the Warner Brother record people were coming through town, and they called on Dan because he was an important DJ. And he said, "I have this friend of mine that I think is very funny." And they said, "Well, we'd like to hear some of his stuff." So Dan called me up. He said, "Have you got a tape recorder?" I said, "No, I don't." He said, "Well, see if you can borrow one and just put down the routines, because the Warner Brother record people want to listen to it."
Listen to your stuff.
So I brought it down to downtown to WCFL was the radio station, and or WLS, I forget which one it was now, but I played it for them. So they said, "Okay, Comedy Records." This was in 1959, and Comedy Records were starting to make some noise. Mort Saul had a comedy album. Michael Lane, Shelley Bourbon, Jonathan Winters, Lenny Bruce, and they were starting to make. So they said, "Okay, we'll give you a recording contract to record a comedy album. That took about a year because I'd never played a nightclub, and no one wanted to take a chance on somebody who had never played a nightclub before. So they finally got me a job in Houston, Texas, at a club called the Tidelands, and I worked there for about 2 weeks, I think, and then at the end of the 2 weeks, they were going to tape on a Friday and a Saturday, and so they recorded it, and then nothing happened. I didn't hear anything for, it was like January of 1960 at that point. So I hadn't heard anything. So I called them up and I said, whatever happened to that comedy record? And they said, it's going crazy in Minneapolis. That a disc jockey has picked it up, and they play it all the time on the radio, and they even they'll put it in the paper at 5:30, the driving instructor at 6:15, Abe Lincoln, and then the record just went crazy. It just exploded. And it became the best-selling comedy record ever made at that time. I think still today. And I received 3 Grammys in '61 for the year of 1960, as the album of the year.
And a Peabody Award for the Bob Newhart Show.
Well, that was
That was later.
That was the television show, the event. Yeah. So all of a sudden I was getting taking nothing, part-time jobs to just existing. I was getting phone calls to how many Ed Sullivan shows did I want to do, and it was like, and then I played a club. The second club I played, I almost went back to accounting because I didn't get a laugh for 2 shows a night for a week, and not even a cough. I mean, a cough would have been some kind of sound, but and they were Canadian. It was in London, Ontario, Canada, at a club called the Elmwood Casino, and they were very nice. They just no one laughed, and that was my first exposure to dying. But then the next club I played was in Winnipeg, Canada, and they were great, and so I stuck it out. And then I was just kind of carried along by the momentum of the album.
I want to go back to 1959 when you signed your first recording contract with Warner Brothers. What was that like for you?
Well, they were the first people who ever. I would write these things. They strike me funny, and I write them down, even though I didn't really have anywhere that I was going to use them. I had no place to use them. I had 3 routines when I signed the record contract. I had a routine called the Abe Lincoln routine, which was a story of a PR man who was trying to fashion an Abe Lincoln type president out of somebody who didn't have all those things, that the elevator didn't go to the top floor. He was a taco short of a combination plate. Then I did one on teaching a woman how to drive, which would be politically incorrect today, but it wasn't at that time. And then a routine called the Submarine Commander. And those were the 3 routines, and then I had to fill up the other side of the album because I didn't have enough material.
What was your favorite routine?
Abe Lincoln, probably. I think it said a lot about today, even more than it did at that time. The focus groups and this last election we just had, you had one side was going after the popular vote, and the other side was going after the electoral count. And it turns out the side that was going for the electoral won the electoral vote, even though the popular vote, the other side had the popular vote. It was all focus groups and what city should we play and what city shouldn't we play, and it was a very directed, a lot of computer printouts, and so even today, and that was 1960. It still has a lot of relevancy today.
Could you do a little of your, a little bit from Abraham Lincoln?
Well, it's hard to do when you take it out of context. I'm trying to think of. Well, for instance, in other words, if we didn't have Abe Lincoln as president, as one of our greatest presidents ever, if there had been someone who wasn't as bright as Abe, would the advertising specialist be able to create an Abe Lincoln out of the man who was less than an Abe Lincoln? And they would tell him, like, Abe, read the bio, the biography, because you keep getting things wrong all the time. Like for instance, you were a rail splitter, then an attorney. You wouldn't give up your law practice to become a rail splitter. So the next time they ask you, and then at one point, Abe says, I'm receiving a lot of complaints on General Grant and his drinking, and he said, I need get the gag writers working and see if they can't give me a snapper, where I can come back the next time they bring it up. So they continued talking. He said, okay, the guys will come up with something. The next time they ask you about Grant's drinking, tell him you're going to get a case of it for all the other generals, which is actually what Abe had said about Grant, because he had been so successful. He'd been so, even as a drunk, he was more successful than a lot of his sober generals were. And but he kept having to explain to Abe, no, Abe, no, it's like the reason he's winning is because of what he's drinking, the brand. That's no, Abe. Abe, do it. It's funny. Trust me, do it. So that was, and again, that was just something that struck me funny. I read a book called The Hidden Persuaders, and it was about subliminal advertising, and I had nowhere to use it. I just wrote it down, and it's funny, but when you're writing new material, the really good material, it writes itself. It just flows. It just, and then there are other routines I've had that I just slaved over and changed the ending, but the good ones just seem to have a life of their own.
I'm curious, Mr. Newhart, because you no doubt had a strong voice in comedy, but how were you able to transition to a prominent face on TV?
Well, comedians, I always say comedians are never off. You're never on vacation because you're always observing people. I mean, you'll be. We're going to Hawaii with the family in April, and you sit on the beach. But if you're a comedian, you're watching the people on the beach, and you see somebody and say, "Oh, that's a funny walk. That guy has a funny walk. I gotta remember the way that guy walked because I may need that one day." And so you're always
You're always analyzing everything.
so when you go into acting, as I did in the Bob Newhart show, a lot of it was a result of watching people and making notes over the years about if I ever get the chance, I've got to use that walk.
I see. What was it like working with Will Ferrell and Elf?
Well, Will's great. He's a joy to work with, and a lot of people, he doesn't get the credit that he and Jon Favreau, the director, deserve for it. It was very easy for Buddy in Elf to be just stupid. And yet Will was able to make him believable and likable, and that's very difficult to do because it very easily could have gone right into, what's wrong with him? Doesn't he realize he's bigger than? But he was able to pull that off, which is a great piece of acting.
Over 40 years, I mean, Newhart show is around in the 1970s, but do people still ask you today about the ending of Newhart?
Yes. Well, that was actually my wife's idea.
Really?
The final episode. It was the Bob Newhart show. Was on at 9 o'clock, 9:30, I guess it was. No, I'm sorry. We went back in Newhart, and we were on Monday at 9 o'clock, which was not a hit time slot, and we were able to build the show into a hit time slot. So after about 6 years of Newhart, the show, the Vermont show, CBS was moving us around, and I thought they were kind of being unfair to the show, which I felt they had done a lot for CBS. So this was in the 6th year of the show, and I said to my wife, it was around Christmas time. I said went to someone's house for a Christmas party, and I said to her, we were waiting to get our picture taken with the host and hostess, and I said, I think this is going to be the last year of the show, and she knew I had been unhappy, and she said right away as we were standing there, she said, well, if you end the show, you ought to end it on a dream sequence, because there's so much that doesn't make sense. I mean, the maid was an heiress, and the handyman wasn't handy at all, and Peter Scolari talked in alliteration, and then there were these 3 people, obviously from West Virginia, and what the hell are they doing in Vermont? So I said it was a great idea. Well, it turns out CBS and I were able to work out the problems. So we did 2 more years. So in the 8th year, I decided that was going to be the final episode of the show, and I gave the idea, my wife's idea, to the writers, and they built a show around it. So.
Did they agree with your wife's idea, or they had to just change a little bit of?
Well, they did a wonderful job of
Adjusting it?
Of adjusting it, filling it out. But it was her idea, and we got a lot of reaction around the country too.
Yeah, a lot of people with question marks, certainly. I have to ask you, how has comedy changed now, looking back to the 1960s, 1970s? Are stand-up comedians more rude and vulgar?
Well, rude and vulgar is an odd phrase because, for instance, I think the most influential comedian of the past 50 years is Richard Pryor. Do I find him rude and vulgar? Not at all. He is. He's talking about life in the inner city. I received the Mark Twain Award years ago. The first recipient was Richard Pryor. And in a certain way, Richard was doing the same thing that Mark Twain was doing in 1900. Mark Twain was describing life on the Mississippi, and the frontier, what was considered the Mississippi was the frontier of the United States. And Richard was doing life in the inner city. So they were both kind of doing the same thing. I disagree whether they use shock just for shock value. But when it's essential to the material, I don't find it vulgar or upsetting.
Do you think certain audiences nowadays like seeing vulgar and
Younger audience. Yeah. Well, younger audiences want the comedy faster. We used to take on the Bob Newhart show and on Newhart. We would take sometimes a minute to set up a joke. I don't think you can do that today. I think it's got to be bang, 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 bang. That's the audience. They've demanded that. That's what they want. And they want it in their music, and they want it in their life. They want it faster. And so it isn't wrong or right. It's just.
It's what it is. It's how comedy has changed.
Yeah.
Who are you a fan of now? Which comedians do you watch today?
Well, the young comedian, I don't know, you may not be familiar with some of them. There's a comedian named Wayne Fetterman. I like Jim Gaffigan. I like, I don't know if you're familiar with the work, with his work, I'm going to forget his name now. I'm sorry. So I'll make it so you can make an edit, all right? There's a comedian I like very much named Jake Johansson. There are a lot of young guys coming along.
Do any of them call you, text you, email you for advice, or?
Well, in Wayne's case, I saw him on a I think it was on Fallon, and I wrote him a note and told him I saw him. I liked his humor and good luck, and I hope things work out for you. And he wrote back, and I think it's important to encourage people. You know, you need that kind of everybody in whatever walk of life you need the encouragement that you're good at something and stay with it, and it may not be working now, but it will because you're good at it. And not just comedy, but in life.
Mm-hmm. What piece of recommendation would you give to up and coming or people who are pursuing careers in comedy?
I would encourage anyone to do it. It's even if it doesn't work out, it's incredible training to get up in front of a live audience, which I've read when people would list the scariest things they could imagine. One of them is getting up in front of a live audience. So if you can get up in front of a live audience, especially as a comedian, that's going to help you the rest of your life, whether you become a professional comedian or not.
I'm curious, Mr. Newhart.
Yep.
I know you've been on a couple seasons of The Big Bang Theory. You were in Elf, but what do you do now in your spare time?
I still do stand. I'm cutting back. I'm doing. Well, I'm 87, so at some point you've got to say enough's enough. It's more the travel and the inconvenience of travel. But once you get there and once you're on the stage and it's working, it's worth all the aggravation. I'll do this year probably maybe 10 stand-up dates. And I can't ever imagine, as long as I'm physically able, I can't ever imagine not doing stand-up. I mean, I can't.
Is that feeling when you get on stage the same feeling you had the first time you got on stage?
When I go to a date today, and this is 1960, so this is 57 years ago. 1960, yeah, 57 years ago. January of 1960, 57 years ago. At about 6 o'clock, I'll start pacing, and I'll pace, and I'll pace, and I'll pace until showtime, and then the band will play on music, and ladies and gentlemen, Bob Newhart, and I'll walk out and
Do your stuff.
yeah, I don't accept anything as a given. It's that adrenaline rush that you need to get out to get out there on stage, and as I say, it's worth all the aggravation in the world just to be there, to be having a good time, for the audience to be having a good time. It's a narcotic of some kind.
Yeah. I'd like to take a quick sidetrack here to,
Sure.
Is there anything you have to say about the late Mary Tyler Moore?
Well, Mary, she and Grant Tinker and Arthur Price formed a company called MTM. And I was lucky enough to have been part of that. It was an incredible, wonderful place. I don't think it exists anymore. Creativity was highly praised and highly sought after. The writer was king. The creative person was king. And I was lucky enough to be part of that world. And that came from Mary and Grant and Arthur, that they created that atmosphere for actors and writers and directors. And it was a wonderful place.
When I told some people that I was going to interview you, they wanted to know what your relationship was, your friendship with Jonathan Winters was. Can you tell?
Johnny? Oh, Johnny. See, it's hard to say Jonathan Winters and not to start to laugh. It's hard to say Tim Conway and not start to laugh. Johnny was the best, no question about it. Johnny was at his time in the field of comedy, he was the best. And I thought to myself, because I was starting out shortly after Johnny, and I thought to myself, well, no one's funnier than Johnny Winters. And I said, well, but number 4 isn't bad, you know. Yet without doing Johnny, you learned a lot from Johnny. Just his stream of consciousness. They give him something, and he'd make a whole story, a whole half-hour story out of an orange ball, a tennis ball, something.
How about Robin Williams, who just died? They were buddies. They were kind of like the same kindred spirit.
They did, yeah. They did. I don't want to get into it because Robin's dead, but he was doing Johnny.
That's what he was doing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, much faster. Again, we're back to the speed aspect of it, but much faster.
He was channeling Jonathan Winters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never put that together. It makes perfect sense.
Oh yeah, no question about it. He admitted he was a huge fan of Johnny's.
Right, there you go.
Tom Poston told me, because he was on Mork and Mindy, and he said when they had Johnny Winters on, which was fairly often, he said sometimes it'd be 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon before they ever got their first shot, because the two of them were just playing off each other, just feeding each other.
To wrap up Meet Up with Austin, I'd like to ask you one final question.
Sure.
What is the most important thing you've learned in your life?
Whoa. Well, actually, it's very simple, I guess. It's family and friends. And the rest of it doesn't matter a hell of a lot. We just lost a good friend of ours, Mike Connors, who was he was Maddox on television, and you begin to realize how important friends are and how important family is, and all the awards and everything else. Don't mean to hill of beans, to borrow a line from Casablanca.
Alrighty, that wraps up Meet Up with Austin. I'm Austin Furhman. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to interview you, Mr. Newhart.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you. We'll see you next time on Meet Up with Austin.